In the swirling snow, two little girls, wrapped in one thin coat, held each other close. When a lonely millionaire CEO stopped and opened his arms, none of them knew that moment would change all their lives forever. The streetlights along Willow Creek's main road flickered in the wind, their pale glow barely cutting through the swirling snow that blanketed everything in sight. It was the kind of night that swallowed sound, where footsteps disappeared and breath froze before it left your lips. On a lonely bench just past the intersection, two small figures huddled close. So close you could almost mistake them for a single child if you weren't paying attention. But there were two. Twin girls, Harper and Maisie Lane, both 7 years old, sat pressed together beneath a battered, threadbare coat that looked more like a memory than real protection. Harper's hands, knuckles red and raw, gripped the sleeves so tightly her fingernails left half-moon marks in the fabric. Maisie, shivering so hard her teeth clicked, wiped away silent tears with the back of her hand, watching as they froze to her cheek almost instantly. "If only Mommy was here, we'd be warm," Maisie whispered, the words trembling in the icy air. Harper didn't answer. She just squeezed Maisie closer, her gaze fixed on the empty road ahead. Her mind flashed to a time not so long ago, a bright kitchen, the scent of cinnamon, laughter and warmth filling every corner. Now it was only the wind howling through her memories, pushing out every good thing and leaving nothing but silence and fear. Inside, Harper's thoughts spun in circles. No one's coming for us. No one ever does. We have to hold on, just for a little longer. Across town, Michael Grayson stared through his windshield as snow whipped against the glass, wipers thumping in a tired rhythm. His luxury SUV was warm, almost too warm, but the chill in his chest wouldn't fade no matter how high he cranked the heat. Grief, he'd learned, was colder than any Vermont winter. It lived in his bones, just beneath the surface, impossible to shake, even after years had passed since he lost his wife and only child. He reached for his phone as it buzzed. Another reminder of a board meeting in Boston he'd have to miss. Another voicemail from an assistant who never quite knew what to say. Michael ignored them all, focusing instead on the empty road ahead. He should have kept driving. He should have stayed lost in his own darkness. But then, in the glare of his headlights, he saw them. Two tiny shapes hunched together, unmoving, half buried in the snow. For a moment, Michael's breath caught. The world narrowed to that single, impossible sight. His heart skipped, a shudder ran down his spine. He slammed on the brakes, tires crunching over the snow and ice as the SUV slid to a stop. His hands, still gloved but suddenly clammy, tightened on the wheel until his knuckles blanched. This couldn't be real, he thought. It was as if a memory had crawled out of his own past and planted itself here, in the middle of nowhere. But these weren't ghosts. These were children, shivering in the dark. He left the engine running, the heater blasting as he stumbled from the car, boots sinking into the fresh snow. "Hey," Michael called, his voice cracking in the wind. "Hey, are you all right?" Harper's head snapped up. Her eyes, blue and fierce, glared back at him. Maisie shrank against her sister, trying to disappear. Michael crouched, careful not to get too close, every instinct screaming at him to do something, but afraid of scaring them more. "It's okay," he said gently. "I won't hurt you." "I just want to help." Michael knelt down, his voice gentle. "Can you tell me your names?" Harper hesitated, then answered softly, "I'm Harper. This is my sister." Maisie. Maisie's teeth chattered as she pressed her face into Harper's shoulder. Harper looked Michael up and down. Expensive coat, neat hair, a stranger's face, but saw only danger. "We don't need help," she said, voice shaking more from cold than defiance. Michael's heart twisted. "Please," he said. "It's freezing. I have a warm car. I can call someone for you. I promise I'm not leaving you out here." For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the wind rattling the empty street and the twins' ragged breathing. Finally, Harper nodded, too exhausted to argue. Michael moved quickly but gently, scooping Maisie into his arms first, then guiding Harper toward the open door of the SUV. He wrapped the car blanket around them, cranked the heat higher, and offered his thermos of lukewarm coffee. Maisie shrank from his touch at first, eyes wide with fear, but Harper kept a protective arm around her, refusing to let go even as her own teeth chattered uncontrollably. Michael stammered, searching for words. "It's all right. You're safe here. I'll call someone. We'll get you someplace warm," but as he looked at their blue lips, trembling hands, and hollow cheeks, he realized something inside him had shifted. This wasn't someone else's problem anymore. It was his. He glanced at the empty road behind them, the swirling storm hiding every other light and sound. The whole world had gone silent, as if waiting for him to decide what happened next. For the first time in a long time, Michael Grayson's world was no longer his own. The fluorescent lights in the rural Willow Creek clinic flickered faintly above the battered waiting room. Salt-stained boots dripped puddles onto cracked linoleum, and the air buzzed with the low thrum of an old radiator working overtime. Michael sat hunched in a plastic chair, his nerves as taut as violin strings. Beside him, Harper and Maisie curled together on the exam table, still bundled in the scratchy blanket he'd managed to find in his car. Harper glared at every nurse who came close, while Maisie hid her face, cheeks still blotched pink from the cold. They hadn't spoken since they'd arrived. A nurse with tired eyes took Harper's temperature, glancing at the bruise blooming faintly on her forearm. "Does this hurt, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice gentle. Harper's lips pressed into a stubborn line. "No," she whispered, too quickly. Maisie didn't look up, arms wrapped around Harper's waist as if she were an anchor in a storm. In the brief silence, Michael reached out, offering the small mug of cocoa a nurse had given him. For a moment, Maisie didn't move. Then, in a gesture so subtle Michael almost missed it, her pinky finger curled around his gloved hand as she accepted the cup. It was a fleeting touch, a tremor of trust where there had been only fear. The door opened with a creak, and a woman in a heavy wool coat stepped in, her dark hair pulled back and eyes sharp with experience. Ruth Daniels, the county social worker, introduced herself with a nod. She surveyed the room, lingering on the girls, then on Michael, her gaze wary. "You're the man who brought them in?" Ruth asked, her tone neutral, but with an undercurrent of suspicion. Michael nodded, forcing himself to meet her eyes. "I found them at the bus stop. In the snow. They were—" He swallowed, unable to finish. Ruth jotted something in her notebook. "And you are?" "Michael Grayson," he replied, offering his business card almost reflexively, but Ruth didn't take it. She eyed his tailored coat, his expensive watch, and then the twins. "Can you explain how you came to be driving in Willow Creek during the worst storm of the year, Mr. Grayson?" Michael hesitated. He'd barely been able to explain it to himself. A business trip detoured by the blizzard, a wrong turn, fate, or accident. "I was passing through. My car got stuck when the highway closed. I saw them. I couldn't leave them." Ruth's eyes narrowed, Before she could press further, Michael's phone buzzed. Again, he silenced it, but the screen glowed with a dozen missed calls and emails. The assistant's last message flashed. Urgent. Board meeting started without you. Michael looked at the girls, then back at Ruth. He let the phone drop into his coat pocket. For the first time in years, he didn't care about the meeting. The nurses finished their exam, reporting no frostbite, but both girls were underweight and clearly traumatized. Ruth thanked them, then knelt at the girl's eye level, her voice soft but firm. Harper, Maisie, do you know where you are? Maisie pressed closer to Harper, who stared at Ruth with open suspicion. We're at the doctor's, Harper said flatly. You don't need to call anyone. We're fine, Ruth smiled gently. You're very brave. But I need to ask, where do you live? Who's taking care of you? Maisie squeezed her eyes shut. Harper shook her head, blonde hair falling over her eyes. We're together. That's all that matters. Ruth caught sight of a faded bruise near Harper's wrist, and something like sorrow flickered in her expression. Sometimes, grown-ups need help too, she said. Can you tell me if someone hurt you? Harper bristled, her shoulders drawing up. We're fine. She shot Michael a look, as if daring him to betray her. Outside, snow drifted against the clinic windows, muting the world to a hush. Michael watched, tension pooling in his chest. He'd never felt so powerless. He excused himself to the hallway, hands shaking as he tried to steady his breath. The harsh white light reflected his face in the window. Drawn, older, lost. But behind that reflection, he saw Harper and Maisie, their faces pale with cold, their eyes wide and hollow. Maisie's voice echoed in his head. Don't leave. The plea clung to him, burrowing deeper than he wanted to admit. Back inside, Ruth continued her questioning, but the twins refused to give details. Harper guarded their secrets with silent fury, while Maisie withdrew into herself, lips moving as if whispering to someone far away. The nurse offered Maisie a sticker, but she only shook her head, clutching Harper's sleeve. As Ruth closed her notebook, Michael turned to leave and dropped his handkerchief. Harper, after a long moment, picked it up and handed it to him, her fingers barely brushing his. You dropped this, she said, her voice almost a whisper. For the first time, she didn't look away. In that small act, a door opened, just a crack. Ruth watched the exchange, studying Michael's face. Are you family? She asked. Michael shook his head. No, I couldn't leave them. Ruth's skepticism faded a shade, replaced by something more searching. Most people wouldn't stay, she said quietly, especially if it costs them. Michael looked at the girls, then back at Ruth. I'm not most people. I'll stay as long as they need me. A pause hung in the air. Ruth considered, then nodded. For tonight, the girls will stay here under observation. We'll contact Child Protective Services in the morning. Michael nodded, feeling the weight of the girls' eyes on him. As the nurses ushered them into a small exam room, Harper turned back. You're coming back, right? She asked, barely audible. Michael smiled, a real, honest smile he hadn't felt in years. I'll be here. I promised that night as the storm howled beyond the frosted windows. Michael sat in the hard chair just outside the girls' room, watching their sleeping forms through the glass. His phone buzzed, screen lighting up with urgent reminders from another world, but he didn't answer. All he could see were the girls' faces in the snow, and all he could hear was Maisie's voice echoing in the quiet. Don't leave. He closed his eyes, letting the memory settle. For the first time in a long time, Michael Grayson felt sure of what mattered most. He would not walk away. Not now. Not ever. The storm raged on, relentless, hurling snow against the windows as the world outside Willow Creek seemed to shrink to a cold, colorless blur. Michael barely slept. He paced the hallway outside the clinic's observation room, glancing through the narrow glass panel where Harper and Maisie slept, curled together on the tiny hospital bed. At dawn, the doctor cleared the twins to be discharged, but with the county roads still nearly impassable, there was nowhere to send them but the nearest motel. Ruth Daniels signed the release papers herself, casting a wary but grateful look at Michael. "I'll check in on you tomorrow," she promised, her eyes lingering on the girls. "Keep them warm. Don't let them out of your sight." The motel sat on the outskirts of town, a squat, two-story building battered by years of hard winters. Inside, the air reeked faintly of mildew and disinfectant, the faded floral carpet stained and bunched at the seams. The heater in their room buzzed and rattled, fighting a losing battle against the chill that seeped through the thin walls. Neon from the sign outside stuttered through threadbare curtains, throwing restless shadows across the beds. Michael, who'd spent his adult life in penthouse suites and five-star resorts, took in the cracked Formica table, the peeling wallpaper, and felt a twist of something between guilt and humility. Harper perched on the edge of the bed, arms folded tight, her chin lifted in silent challenge. Maisie shivered beside her, rubbing her hands together for warmth, small shoulders shaking beneath the thrift store coat. Michael did his best to settle them in, stacking every spare blanket he could find at the foot of the bed, then laying out what little food he'd gathered from the gas station down the street. A loaf of bread, peanut butter, apples, and a couple of boxes of juice. They ate in silence. Maisie, her face smudged with exhaustion, tried to scrape flecks of ice from her fingers before reaching for the bread. Harper eyed every movement Michael made, refusing to touch her food until Maisie had finished hers. The air between them was brittle, full of tension, but also something like hope, thin and trembling. Michael watched, fighting his own discomfort. The gnawing realization hit him again. These girls knew more about survival than most adults he'd ever met. As dusk settled, Michael stepped into the bathroom, closing the door behind him just long enough to check his phone. A flood of emails filled the screen, meeting reminders, questions from his real estate team, a curt message from his lawyer. "Where are you? The Westbury deal is falling apart." Michael stared at the screen. His thumb hovered over the reply button. Finally, he typed, "Reschedule all meetings. Emergency family situation. I'll call when I can." He surprised himself by meaning it. Back in the main room, Harper and Maisie had stacked their shoes neatly by the door. Harper pulled a threadbare sock from her coat pocket, unrolling it to reveal 3 stale crackers and a single butterscotch candy. She slipped one cracker to Maisie, tucking the others beneath her pillow. Michael felt a wave of sorrow and, unexpectedly, admiration. These girls had learned to save, to hide, to stretch every scrap. His throat tightened as he watched Maisie cradle the candy in her palm, smiling faintly for the first time. A knock at the door startled them all. Michael opened it to find Mrs. Eleanor Pierce, the twins' elderly neighbor, her silver hair tucked beneath a woolen hat. Her eyes shone with worry as she handed Michael a faded photograph in a plastic bag. "Ruth called me this morning and told me the girls were safe, but staying at the motel for now," Eleanor explained, her voice trembling with relief. "Their mother gave me this photo a few years back, asked me to keep it safe. she said, just in case the girls ever need it someday. I thought you should have this, she whispered, nodding toward the twins. It's their family. Their mother was a good woman, and their stepfather, Ray, he's not fit to raise chickens, let alone children. She hesitated, lowering her voice further. I've heard things, Mr. Grayson, yelling, crying at night. Those girls need someone on their side. Don't let them go back to him. Michael nodded, slipping the photo into his pocket. He promised to keep it safe, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavier on his shoulders. Night fell early, the wind moaning against the windows. Michael tried to make the room as comfortable as he could, dimming the lights, bundling the girls in every available blanket. Harper remained guarded, but Maisie, worn out, finally drifted off to sleep, her cheek pressed to her sister's shoulder. Lying on the other bed, Michael stared at the stained ceiling, listening to the girls' steady breathing. He thought about all he'd built, his company, his fortune, the pristine order of his old life, and how hollow it all seemed now, compared to the fragile warmth in this shabby motel room. He remembered Harper's defiant glare at the clinic, Maisie's tiny fingers curling around his hand. They weren't just statistics in a file. They were real, and they needed him. He replayed Eleanor's words in his mind, piecing together everything she'd said about Ray Coleman. Anger smoldered beneath his grief. How could anyone treat children this way? And what about their real father? Where was he in all this? He pulled out the photograph, tracing the faces with his thumb. The girls looked younger, sandwiched between a smiling woman and a tall, dark-haired man. The mother's eyes sparkled with life, the father's arm wrapped tight around his daughter's. Michael wondered if he was still alive, if he even knew what had happened to his girls. Sometime after midnight, Harper's soft voice drifted across the room. Mr. Grayson. He turned, surprised to hear his own name on her lips. Yeah, Harper? She hesitated, then asked, Are you really coming back tomorrow? Or will you leave like everyone else? The question cut deeper than she could know. Michael sat up, looking her in the eye. I promise, Harper. I'm not going anywhere. She studied him for a long moment. Then, for the first time, she nodded. Not quite trust, but something that could grow. As snow battered the walls outside, Michael finally allowed himself to rest, letting the tension in his chest unravel a little. He knew he wasn't just passing through Willow Creek anymore. He was all in. If these girls needed a defender, he'd be it, even if it meant putting everything else on hold. In the dark, the room hummed with the sound of the old heater and the soft, even breaths of two sleeping children. For the first time in years, Michael Grayson didn't feel completely alone. And as the storm raged on, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he had finally found the beginning of a reason to hope again. Morning in the motel crept in slow and gray, the snow finally easing as Willow Creek awoke from its restless night. Michael stirred early, exhaustion pressing on his bones, but resolve even heavier. The twins were still curled together beneath the heap of blankets, their faces soft in sleep, innocence momentarily unguarded. For a long moment, Michael simply watched them, letting the quiet strength of that image seep into his own brittle heart. He'd known for years what it was to feel alone, but never had he witnessed so clearly how much a little safety could mean. After a breakfast of toast and apples, Michael bundled the girls into their borrowed coats and boots. They needed clothes, real ones, warm and clean. At the thrift store, Harper's eyes caught on a bright red knit hat perched atop a pile of scarves. She tried to hide her interest, but Michael noticed. He picked it up, pretended to check the size, then handed it to her with a shrug. "Looks like it was made for you," he said, acting casual. Harper hesitated, then took it, the faintest hint of a smile flickering across her lips. For Maisie, he chose a thick, bear-patterned fleece blanket, wrapping her up right there in the aisle as she giggled into its soft folds. Small, practical gifts, but for the twins, they were treasures. On the way back, Michael stopped at the drugstore for art supplies, letting the girls pick out markers, a notebook, and a package of stickers. "You can draw anything you want," he told them, "or write about how you feel. No one else has to see unless you want them to." Maisie clung to her blanket, cheeks pink for the first time, while Harper pretended not to care. But she never let the hat out of her hands. Back at the motel, over a breakfast of warm oatmeal, Harper and Maisie grew restless, trading quiet glances before Harper finally pulled a balled-up sock from her backpack. Inside, wrapped carefully, was a small, faded photograph, edges curling, colors nearly gone. She set it on the table between them, sliding it toward Michael without a word. He stared, recognizing the same faces from Eleanor's photo. A smiling mother, the twins a few years younger, and a tall man with kind eyes. "That's our daddy," Maisie whispered. "He's not really dead. We know he isn't." Harper nodded, her voice rough with hope and defiance at once. "Ray says he's gone. But we don't believe him." Michael felt reverence, a solemn respect for what the girls had managed to preserve. He gently smoothed the photo with his thumb, feeling the loss and hope tangled in the paper's creases. He looked up, his throat thick. "Thank you for trusting me with this," he said quietly. "I'll keep it safe." Later, as Michael fielded yet another call from his frantic board, his company's flagship deal on the verge of collapse, he stepped into the bathroom and pressed his forehead to the mirror. "Not now," he whispered, staring at his own tired eyes. "I'm with someone who needs me." He powered off his phone for the first time in years. Outside, Ruth Daniels arrived, arms full of donated clothes and fresh food from the community pantry. She watched Michael set the phone aside, her professional skepticism melting away as she saw the way Harper instinctively stepped closer to him, or how Maisie let herself rest against his arm. Over the next few days, the motel room transformed. Laughter began to replace silence, a patchwork of colored drawings taped to the walls, smiling stick figures, blue skies, a little red hat, made the space feel almost like home. Maisie drew a picture of herself and Harper, hand in hand with a tall man with brown hair. "For you," she said shyly, pushing the paper across the table. "You made us safe." Michael's hands shook as he took it. "This is the best gift I've gotten in a long time," he whispered, struggling not to let tears fall in front of the girls. But the fragile peace was soon threatened. That afternoon, as Michael walked the girls back from the clinic, where Maisie got her first proper checkup, Ray Coleman appeared at the edge of the parking lot, looming beneath the low, sullen sky. His face was a mask of practiced concern, but his eyes glinted with anger. "There you are," Ray said, voice too loud. "I've been looking everywhere. Come on, girls, let's go home." Harper froze, her fingers tightening around Maisie's wrist. Michael stepped forward, planting himself between Ray and the girls. "They're not going anywhere with you, Ray," he said, voice low but steady. "We're waiting for social services. And if you touch them, you'll answer to the whole town." Ray sneered, taking a step forward. "They're my responsibility, not yours." Michael didn't back down. Not anymore. Ruth, seeing the confrontation from the clinic window, hurried outside with a police officer close behind. "Back away, Mr. Coleman," she ordered, her voice sharp. "The girls are under protective custody." The officer added, "You need to leave now, or you'll be charged with interfering." Ray's bravado faltered, anger boiling beneath the surface, but he retreated, shooting Michael a look of pure venom. Shaken but safe, Michael gathered the girls close. Harper, breath shaky, stepped in front of Maisie, a protective stance she'd learned far too young. Maisie buried her face in Michael's coat, letting herself believe for the first time that this new grown-up would stand up for them, no matter what. That night, as the motel quieted and the wind died down, Michael found the picture Maisie had drawn tucked beneath his pillow. Harper had written, in careful, blocky letters, "Thank you for staying." For the first time in years, Michael felt the flicker of something unfamiliar. Belonging. He drifted to sleep, the girls finally safe on the bed beside him, knowing that tomorrow would bring more challenges, but also, maybe, a little more hope. The snow outside the motel was beginning to melt, leaving behind icy patches and small puddles that reflected the pale, uncertain sun. Inside, the transformation was even more profound. The cramped room, once heavy with silence and suspicion, now echoed with the lightest of laughter, tentative at first, then growing stronger each day. Toys scavenged from thrift stores and a second-hand bookstore were scattered across the scratchy carpet. On the walls, the twins had taped drawings, blue skies, bright red hats, smiling stick figures holding hands. For the first time since Michael could remember, a room felt alive again. He'd found a rhythm, making oatmeal in the battered microwave, brewing cocoa in paper cups, reading stories aloud before bed. He bought Harper and Maisie blank journals, encouraging them to draw or write whatever they felt. Maisie, her small fingers stained with marker ink, filled page after page with pictures of suns bursting through clouds. Harper wrote carefully, "You stayed," in her notebook, and then shyly handed it to Michael to read. Ruth Daniels stopped by daily, bringing fresh groceries and updates from the investigation. Her skepticism had given way to a kind of quiet admiration as she watched Michael put his work, his reputation, and even his fortune on hold for the girls. One evening, as she dropped off a care package, she found Michael crouched on the floor, building a cardboard fort with the twins. "I never thought I'd see you here, Grayson," she admitted, a smile tugging at her lips. "Most people would have run back to Boston by now." Michael looked up, brushing a stray lock of Harper's hair from her face. "Most people never had a reason to stay," he said. "Now I do." The girls were changing, too. Maisie began to hum while coloring, the tune unfamiliar but soothing. Harper was slower to open up, but started volunteering small details, about her favorite books, about how she used to help her mother bake, about the dreams she had where their dad came home. The nightmares hadn't stopped entirely, but when they did come, Harper let Michael sit at the edge of her bed and hold her hand until she drifted back to sleep. One morning, Michael's phone vibrated with a string of urgent messages. His assistant's voice came through in a whisper of panic. "Michael, the Westbury deal is about to fall apart. They're threatening to walk. We need you back." Michael listened, watching Harper and Maisie laugh over breakfast, Maisie with cocoa smeared across her chin. He pressed the phone to his ear and replied, "Let it go. These girls matter more." He hung up, feeling the final thread to his old world snap. Strangely, He didn't feel regret, only relief. Ruth arrived later that day, her face serious but kind. She sat with Michael at the small table, the girls busy building a puzzle nearby. "We have enough evidence," she said quietly. "Ray is being formally investigated for neglect and fraud. And Michael, the court has agreed to grant you temporary custody of the girls until we can locate their father or next of kin." Michael's throat tightened. He'd been so focused on surviving each day that the thought of becoming anything like a guardian had seemed distant, impossible. Now it was real. He looked at Harper, who stared back, uncertainty in her eyes. "Is that okay with you?" he asked softly. Harper nodded, her voice thin but certain. "You don't leave." "That's what matters." Maisie crawled into his lap, her small arms circling his neck. "Papa Michael?" she whispered for the first time, burying her face in his shirt. Michael wrapped his arms around both girls, silent tears welling in his eyes. That night, as the motel quieted, Harper surprised Michael with a gift. She handed him a new drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a yellow sun. "This is us," she said. "You, me, and Maisie." Together he pressed the paper to his heart. "I'll always keep this with me," he promised. They fell into a new routine. Mornings filled with sunlight and stories, afternoons with games and errands, evenings with soft music and gentle laughter. The room, once haunted by fear, was now filled with warmth. The girls' journals became treasure troves of their hopes and memories. Maisie drew a picture of a house with open windows and a path leading to the door. Harper wrote, "We're safe here. We're not invisible anymore." But outside their fragile haven, reality pressed in. Ray's threats grew more desperate, his calls to social services more frantic. Ruth and the police assured Michael that security would be in place. But each time someone knocked at the door, the girls stiffened, and Michael's heart raced. One evening, Harper asked the question Michael had feared. "What if our dad comes back and doesn't remember us? Or what if he's gone forever?" Michael gathered them close. "Then we keep hoping, and we stay together as long as you need. You're not alone. Not ever again." The twins nodded, Harper's hand finding his, Maisie's head tucked under his chin. Late that night, as the girls slept, Michael sat by the window, the moonlight washing over him. He read the latest email from his assistant. "The board is furious. We're losing clients." He replied, "They'll survive. I found something more important." He set his phone aside, letting gratitude and quiet joy fill the empty spaces grief had once occupied. The next morning, Ruth arrived with news. "We may have a lead on your father," she told the twins. Harper squeezed Maisie's hand, their eyes wide with a hope that was fragile but alive. Michael promised to be there for every step, no matter what the next days would bring. As sunlight spilled into the room, Maisie placed her newest drawing on Michael's pillow. A sun rising over the mountains, 3 figures, and a big, bold word in the sky. Family. For Michael, Harper, and Maisie, the long winter had finally begun to thaw. In the small, cluttered motel room, 3 hearts found a new beginning, bound not by blood, but by love, sacrifice, and the courage to stay when it mattered most. The days that followed felt suspended between seasons. Ice still crusted the motel parking lot. But the sun lingered longer, and the twins' laughter, once cautious, now spilled freely across the tiny room. Michael grew used to their routines. The way Harper insisted on stirring Maisie's cocoa just right, or how Maisie sang soft, wordless melodies as she drew. Their small joys seeped into Michael's bones, thawing pieces of him he'd believed were gone forever. Ruth's visits brought a new kind of energy. She arrived one morning with a stack of papers and an unreadable expression. "We've located someone," she announced gently, her eyes on Harper and Maisie. "A man matching your father's description is alive, in a rehab facility 2 hours from here." Silence swept through the room. Maisie's marker dropped to the floor. Harper's mouth parted in disbelief. "He's alive?" she whispered, as if saying it too loud might shatter the hope she'd carried like a fragile stone. Ruth explained. David Lane, survivor of a factory fire, had been found months earlier wandering, confused, with no memory of who he was. He'd been placed in a rehab center under a temporary name, and only now, thanks to an old photograph Michael had sent, had his true identity emerged. "He's been asking for his family since the staff showed him your picture," Ruth said, voice trembling with emotion. The next day dawned blindingly bright. Michael packed the girls' new clothes in a backpack, tucking Harper's treasured family photo and Maisie's drawings inside. In the car, Maisie's small hand wrapped around Michael's sleeve, silent and scared. Harper sat rigid, watching the world race by, biting her lips so hard it left a red line. Michael tried to steady his voice as he promised, "No matter what happens today, I'll be here." The rehab center sat on the outskirts of a neighboring town, its windows catching the late winter sun. Inside, the air was warm, heavy with a quiet sense of waiting. Ruth led the way through hallways lined with muted art and the faint smell of antiseptic. "He's just through here," she said, pausing at a door. Inside, David Lane stood by the window, thin and pale, a faded hospital bracelet circling his wrist. He turned as they entered, confusion flickering over his face before his gaze fell on the twins. Something in him shifted, a memory breaking the surface. "My girls," he murmured, voice cracking. "I remember you." He knelt as Harper and Maisie raced into his arms, sobs bursting free, their small bodies trembling in the sunlight. David gathered them close, tears streaming down his face as he whispered, "Daddy's home. Daddy's home." Michael stood by the door, watching the reunion with a mix of relief and grief, pride and ache. The pain of his own loss pressed at him, but so did an unexpected joy. In that moment, he realized he wasn't on the outside looking in. He was part of this story now. David looked up at Michael, his voice hoarse but grateful. "Thank you for keeping them safe." Michael knelt beside the family, laying a hand on Harper's back, then Maisie's. "We'll rebuild together," he promised softly. "No one's alone this time." That evening, the staff set a special table for the newly reunited family. Harper, still overwhelmed, insisted, "You have to stay, Michael. Your family too." Maisie nodded, her hand finding his as she tucked in beside her father. They ate together, laughter breaking through nerves, stories tumbling out between bites of soup and bread. Harper showed David the photo she'd carried. Maisie drew a new picture. This time, 4 figures, hands joined beneath a golden sun. Meanwhile, justice for the past began to move forward. Ruth and Eleanor testified about Ray's neglect and fraud. Ray was officially charged, facing trial and the loss of all custody rights. Ruth worked with Michael and David to arrange trauma counseling for the girls and other vulnerable children in Willow Creek, determined that no child would ever slip through the cracks again. That night, as the girls fell asleep in beds they'd only just begun to trust, Michael sat with David by the window, watching the snow glimmer under the street lamps. "I never thought I'd see them again," David confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think I deserved to." Michael shook his head. Every child deserves to come home. Every family deserves a second chance. You're here. That's what matters. Harper and Maisie slept, curled together in the next room, dreams finally sweet and untroubled. And in the quiet, Michael realized that hope, so long frozen beneath grief, was rising again. Steady as the dawn, the thaw came slowly, but it came. In Willow Creek, the ice retreated from sidewalks and the air lost its bite. Each morning, the sunlight pressed deeper through the windows of the Lane family's rented cottage, a small place with cedar walls, a stone fireplace, and the sweet smell of fresh paint. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and the difference was visible on every surface. Children's drawings, some careful, some wildly joyful, were taped all over the fridge. Toys and library books spilled from a repurposed crate in the corner. The small nook under the window, once empty, now held a pile of pillows and blankets, a makeshift reading fort built by Michael's hands, guided by the twins' excited instructions. David Lane, still regaining strength, moved around the house with a quiet, grateful energy. Each day he became more himself, as if fatherhood and sunlight together could repair years of absence. Sometimes, when he believed no one was watching, he pressed his hand to the kitchen doorway, where Maisie had measured her height in shaky pencil. He was determined not to miss another moment. Harper flourished in the stability, her wary glances replaced by curiosity and bursts of laughter. She took to baking with David, filling the kitchen with the scent of cinnamon and apples, echoes of a mother's love kept alive by memory and practice. Maisie, always close by, hummed as she drew elaborate pictures, sometimes tucking them under pillows or sliding them into Michael's coat pocket for him to find later. Michael was a constant presence. He showed up every morning with a paper bag of pastries or a book from the city library. Sometimes he'd kneel by the fireplace, coaxing a flame from damp logs while Harper sat cross-legged beside him, watching intently, or help Maisie write her first letter to a pen pal. He let the girls help him sand the old boards for the backyard treehouse, a half-finished project that, to them, was already a castle. Ruth Daniels became more than a caseworker. She was a family friend now, her arms always full of groceries, second-hand clothes, and town gossip. She rallied neighbors to donate furniture and organize playdates. Eleanor Pierce, proud and practical, arrived with board games and hand-me-down novels, telling stories about the girl's mother that made David and the twins both laugh and cry. The transformation wasn't instant, but it was profound. The twins, once silent and small, now filled the home with life. Their laughter echoed down the hallway, and sometimes, in the quiet of evening, David would sit at the kitchen table with Michael, sharing coffee and the quiet reassurance of men who knew what it meant to lose and to find again. One afternoon, after a long walk through the thawing woods, Michael found an envelope on his dashboard. Harper's handwriting spelled his name in careful block letters. Inside was a letter and a drawing. The words were simple but carried all the weight of the past months. Dear Michael, you saved us not just from the storm, but from being invisible. You saw us. You're our hero beneath it. She'd drawn 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright sun, and beside them a fourth. Tall and smiling, labeled Uncle Michael. The words cut through Michael's armor. He sat in the car for a long time, letter trembling in his hands, before making his way inside. That night, over dinner, Harper handed him another picture. A house with 4 open windows and 2 girls waving from the door. This is us, she said. All of us. That Sunday, The family hosted their first real dinner. Ruth brought her famous chicken pot pie. Eleanor baked bread. David set the table, insisting the girls be in charge of folding napkins, which ended in a flurry of laughter and paper cranes. The dining room was alive with chatter and clinking glasses. Michael's seat set at the head of the table just as Harper had drawn. When the meal was done, Michael lingered, reluctant to leave the warmth behind. Maisie curled into his lap, eyes heavy with sleep. Harper pressed a drawing into his hand, whispering, "Don't go." Michael smiled, ruffling her hair. "I'll always come back," he promised. "You're stuck with me now." Later, as dusk painted gold across the walls, Michael and David sat on the back porch, watching the twins chase fireflies in the yard. "They love you," David said quietly. "They wouldn't have made it without you." Michael shook his head. "They saved me too. I thought I'd forgotten how to hope. Turns out hope just needed a reason." As the sky darkened and the stars appeared, the girls ran back, breathless and grinning, arms flung around Michael and their father. For the first time, there were no shadows in their eyes, only the certainty of belonging and the promise that, whatever storms might come, they would face them together. By April, Willow Creek seemed to have forgotten the cruel silence of winter. The days grew longer, sunlight tumbling across rooftops, melting away the last patches of snow and coaxing green from every stubborn corner. The Lane cottage buzzed with the restless hope that only spring brings, windows thrown open, a breeze full of birdsong, and the echo of children's laughter drifting through the neighborhood. Outside, Harper and Maisie dashed barefoot across the thawed yard, giggling as they chased each other beneath the wide arms of a young maple, the very tree Michael and David had planted together, its roots now pushing deeper, its branches just beginning to bud. The girls wore sundresses Eleanor had altered from thrifted finds. Their hair caught the light, wild and sun-streaked, as they dragged blankets and storybooks under the tree to build a secret fort. All around them, life was in motion. Neighbors raking leaves, Ruth tending new seedlings in her garden, Eleanor waving from her porch with a pie cooling on the rail. The twins' treehouse, still a work in progress but magical in their eyes, grew higher each week. Michael's toolbox became a fixture in the yard, Harper handing him nails and Maisie drawing blueprints in crayon. Neighborhood kids wandered over to help, and soon laughter, hammering, and the excited calls of children made the Lane home the center of spring's awakening. Inside, the house itself had changed. The reading nook overflowed with library books. The fridge was plastered with new drawings, family dinners, sunny days, and always, in one corner, a smiling Uncle Michael. On the wall by the kitchen, David had hung a framed copy of Harper's letter, the one that read, "You saw us. You're our hero." It was both a reminder of what they'd survived and a declaration that invisibility would never threaten their family again. Sunday dinner had become a ritual. That week, the table was set outdoors beneath strings of twinkling lights. Ruth arrived first, arms full of wildflowers. Eleanor brought her best bread and stories of Willow Creek's early days. David grilled chicken and vegetables, the twins arranging place cards in the grass. As Michael's car pulled up, Harper and Maisie raced down the path, arms open. "Uncle Michael, your seat's here," Harper called, waving a napkin like a flag. Maisie grinned, cheeks rosy. "We saved the biggest piece of pie for you." Dinner unfolded with warmth and ease. The twins recited poems they'd written at school. Ruth led a toast to family, by blood, by friendship, by courage, and Eleanor taught everyone how to whistle with blades of grass. Michael looked around the table, his chest tight with gratitude. The man who had once lived only for boardrooms and big city lights now belonged to something infinitely more valuable. As dusk deepened, David and Michael sat together at the table, coffee steaming in chipped mugs, watching the girls catch fireflies under the maple. "Remember when I thought I'd lost them for good?" David said quietly, voice raw with memory and relief. Michael nodded. "Sometimes we're found right when we think we're lost forever." The girls returned, arms full of wildflowers and firefly jars, their laughter echoing through the twilight. Harper climbed into Michael's lap, Maisie tucked under his arm. For a long moment, time itself seemed to pause, just the hush of spring, the heartbeat of family, the miracle of new beginnings. Later, as the stars blinked awake, the families gathered in the grass. Maisie handed Michael her latest drawing, a tree bursting with green, 4 figures standing together beneath it. "It's us," she said, her voice small but certain. "Family." Harper rested her head on his shoulder, looking up at the sky. Her words came soft as a prayer. "We thought no one saw us in the snow. But sometimes miracles come from those who refuse to walk away." Michael squeezed her hand, silent tears warming his cheeks as David, Ruth, and Eleanor drew closer, the circle closing tight around the twins. As the last fireflies flickered and the cool of night settled over Willow Creek, the Lane family, David, Harper, Maisie, and their chosen circle, gathered under the maple tree. Michael looked out across the yard, his heart at peace for the first time in years, certain that the harshest winter always gives way to spring, and that family is built not just from blood, but from those who stay. The story faded out on laughter, on love, on the hush of a world awakened anew, a promise that hope once found could bloom again and again, as long as someone cared enough to hold on. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, we invite you to stay with us. Because here at Restoring Tales, every story reminds us that love, kindness, and second chances still exist. There are more tales waiting, of resilience, of hope, and of quiet heroes among us. So if you believe in the healing power of love and the beauty of life's small moments, be sure to subscribe to Restoring Tales and turn on notifications, because the next story might be the one your heart's been waiting for. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.